Hi guys, and welcome to today's video. If you're new here, hello, welcome. My name's Abby. I make videos all about being a new graduate nurse, and I'd love to have you stick around. You can go down below and hit the subscribe button. I'll also put my Instagram name right here if you want to follow me over there. I do a ton of interacting with you guys over on Instagram and asking about what kind of videos you want to see and all that good stuff. So go follow me on there if you're interested. But hello and welcome to today's video. So today's video is going to be all about how I got my job in the NICU. So if you are new here, I recently accepted a position in a new graduate residency program in the NICU, which if you don't know what the NICU is, it's the neonatal intensive care unit. So it's the ICU, which means you have critical care babies. So that's where I'm going to be working as a new graduate nurse. I recently graduated from school in April. I took my NCLEX in May, and then I'm starting work in August. So it is today, July 28th. So we're a little under a month away from me starting. So I have not started yet, but I wanted to take a second to film this video about how I got my job because I've had a ton of questions about this topic. So I actually, oh no, battery's gonna die, hold on. Okay, we're back. So I actually filmed this video once before and something happened with the SD card. I think it basically just died. I tried everything under the sun to get it to work and it wasn't working, so here we are refilming. So I'm going to start all the way back to the beginning of applying for this job and everything that came with that, and then work my way forward to finding out that I got the position. So I'm going to pull out my calendar. So if you guys don't know what new graduate nurse residency programs are, I will link a video up here. It's a whole Q&A that I did about those programs, what they entail, how to apply for them, what the whole point of them is, what the difference between those jobs and like a regular nurse job is. I'll link that up here and you can go check that out because I'm not going to go super into depth on that since I already covered a lot of that in that last video. But the first thing that I did to get this job was look into their application dates. So a lot of new grad residency programs have what they call application windows. So basically there's about a month period from, let's say mine was March 16th to April 12th. I had the option to apply for these positions during that window. Before the window's open, you can't apply. After the window closes, you can't apply. And this specific hospital, the only way that they hire new grad nurses, so nurses fresh out of nursing school, is through this program. So if you miss the dates, you're kind of out of luck. So it's really important to be on top of it. I started looking into this program probably a year in advance. I'd say last summer, the summer before my senior year. I started looking into it just so I had an idea of when the dates were. I was constantly checking in to make sure I hadn't missed something because I did not want to miss the opportunity to apply to this hospital and to this program. So definitely be on top of it. So like I said, the application window opened on March 16th and closed on April 12th. You have that whole time period to apply, but there's a ton of steps that come with the application process. And for me personally, I wanted to get my application in as quick as possible. So I spent from January to when the application window opened in March doing everything I needed to do. I looked at all the requirements for their application, which was a resume, a cover letter, and then they had what's called a supplemental application. I knew that all of those things were a part of the application process. So I spent literally months from January to when it was due in March working on this application, working on my resume, working on my cover letter, answering the supplemental application questions. I showed it to my husband Connor, I showed it to my parents, I showed it to my coworkers, I showed it to my classmates, I showed it to my friend that has nothing to do with healthcare but she works in PR and I felt like she knew how to like email professionally. So I showed it to her. As many people as I could get eyes on my stuff, I gave it to because I wanted them to critique it and edit it and tell me where I could fix it, and I just felt like the more input I had, the better off I was going to be. So I spent from January to March doing that, literally months. I put so much time into these documents, but it's because I genuinely cared. I wanted to get my point across. I wanted the job. So I definitely recommend doing that, looking into the dates, making sure you're going to get your application in when you want to, but also really taking the time to invest in your application and making it as strong as you possibly can. I'm going to link a template of the resume that I used and a template of my cover letter. They won't have my personal information in it, but I will link it down below so that you can have an idea of like concepts to pull from. And then I'm also going to go over what some of the supplemental application, not the exact questions, but just ideas of what those questions were, so that if you apply to a program that has a supplemental application, then you'll kind of know where to go from there and like have good ideas for ways to answer those questions. Also, something I recommend doing is reading their website and making sure that you're doing everything exactly how they want it done, because they wanted the documents submitted in a very specific way. They wanted one document with your cover letter up top, so the first page they see, and then your resume as the second page. And honestly, I feel like if you didn't meet those requirements, they may not even look at your stuff, because they want you to be detail oriented, they want you to follow the directions, and they want it how they want it. So I definitely pay attention to that. But I just started off my cover letter kind of referencing the coordinator of the program. I talked about the program that I'm applying to, where I graduated from school. They asked for my GPA, so I put my GPA in there. I talked about volunteer work that I've done. Then I talked about my work experience. At the end of that first paragraph, I just let them know that they could find out more detailed information on my volunteer and my work experience and all of that in my resume, which would come right after the cover letter. And then I went into information about just who I am as a person, how I work well with others, things that clinical instructors have had to say about me that were positive. And then I moved on from there and talked about the unit I'm most interested in. I went super in depth on the NICU and why it matters to me and why it's personal to me. So like, obviously, if you read my shirt, I was a preemie, so I'm a NICU baby, so I touched on that and like how I want to give back to that community that served me. And then the last sentence of that paragraph, I talked about the 2 other units that were of interest, because in their directions, like I said, follow the instructions, but in the instructions they said to list your top 3 units of preference. So I talked about the one that I really wanted for like a paragraph, and then the last sentence covered the other 2. And then in the last paragraph, I just talked about why their hospital, why this company, why this unit. Like, I got specific on why I want them and why I think I'd be a great fit. And then I ended the letter. And then my resume, like I said, I'll link the template down below, so you could go look at it as I'm going over this. But I just had my name at the top with like my contact info, my email, my phone number. And then I went into my clinical experience from the most recent clinical experience all the way back to the beginning. So the first was like my senior practicum, and I wrote a little paragraph about things I did in my senior practicum. So I was in the NICU, so I talked about that. Like, I had a 3-patient assignment, I had a 1-to-1 critical assignment, things that I managed, so NG, OG, bottle feeds, glucometer, iStat, PO and IV medication, using heated high flow nasal cannula, bubble CPAP, ventilators, all that stuff. Anything that I came in contact with my patients, I talked about. And then I just went from there, listing all the clinical sites that I've been at, what class it was for, and how many hours. I didn't go in depth onto stuff that I did on those units. I just did that with my senior practicum. I felt like it was a good way to explain like stuff that I had done during that time and how I had been a strong resource in that area, and how that reflects well upon like why I'd be good in this unit, because I have experience. And then underneath clinical experience, I have my education, so just my school, my degree, and my GPA, because again, they asked for my GPA. Then I had certifications, so like CPR or any other certifications you have. And then I had volunteer experience, so everything that I listed in the cover letter, I listed more in detail with some additional ones in the resume. And then underneath the volunteer experience, I had my work experience, and I listed all of that. And at the very bottom, again, just my contact info with my address. So that's what my cover letter and resume looks like. Like I said, sent it to everyone, showed it to everyone, got as much feedback on it as I could. And then the supplemental application. So the supplemental application was a document that they provided with questions that they pre-wrote out, and they wanted you to type out your responses and email it back to them. So I'm not going to go into like what specifically the questions were, but just as an idea, how did you find this hospital and this program? What made you interested in it? What's your philosophy of nursing? Why are you passionate about working with this population? What are your goals for the next few years? Describe any leadership experience that you have. And then list the top 3 units of interest and explain what unit and why specifically you want that unit. So I did that, and I emailed that back to them, and I made sure all of this was ready to go the day that the application window opened. You don't have to do that. There's a reason why there's a window, but I would definitely recommend getting it in early if you can. And to be honest with you, if you think about it, if you submit yours like at 7 a.m. right when the thing opens, they're going to see your application first. Your information is going to come to them first. And if there are 600 applicants, I don't know this for a fact, but if it were me, I would think that if 20 applicants showed up within the first 10 minutes and I read all 20 and I wanted to interview all 20, there's potential that I don't even look at the other 580 applicants, because these 20 are great and I want to interview them and I'm done. So if you get yours in early, I feel like that's the best route to take, just because they see it sooner, then potentially you could get an interview. I don't know. In my head, that just like logically seemed like the best choice. So that's why I wanted to get it in early. Doesn't mean you have to. Doesn't mean you can't get an interview if you submit yours toward the end or the middle or whenever. It may not matter, but I just, in my head, that's like what logically made sense. So I wanted to get it in as soon as possible. So I got it in literally like the minute that it opened, submitted it. And that was, what did I say, March 12th. I had to wait through April They called me at the end of May. I interviewed the middle of June and found out like a few days to a week or so after my interview. So it was a long process because I submitted all my stuff in March and I didn't hear anything from them for 2 months. So it was a lot of waiting, a lot of trying to be patient, all while interviewing with other places, turning other places down. And it was so stressful. It was so hard. It wasn't easy waiting around and like trying to wait for this one position that I wanted, but I was patient and obviously it paid off. So that was the application portion, which I really think is huge. Your cover letter is the first thing they're going to see. You want them to look at that and be like, oh my gosh, okay, now I have to read her resume because it's so great, or his resume because it's so great. And then from there you want them to say, oh my gosh, this person's application was so great, I have to interview them. And then you want them to interview you and then be like, oh my gosh, we have to hire you. So that all starts with the cover letter. The cover letter is the first thing they see. So if you can put a lot of time and effort into making that as sharp and making yourself stand out as much as possible for that, do it. So that was the application portion. For the interview portion, so they called me and were like, hey, we have available on, they listed 3 days, and then we're like, pick the day that you want. So I picked the first date that was available because I felt like that just made the most sense. I wanted to get it done as soon as I could. So I picked the first date that was available and I picked the first time that was available. I think, let me see, what time was my interview? I want to say it was like 9 or 10 in the morning. It was at 9 a.m. So I have a whole vlog from that day. I will link it up here if you want to go check it out. But preparing for my interview, I spent a lot of time researching nursing questions. I watched as many YouTube videos as I could find, like you're probably doing right now, and just really took my time trying to rehearse. I typed out my answers to questions. I looked up practice questions. I rehearsed them with my family. I would talk through them out loud in the shower. Like any experience you can get or exposure you can get to practice questions, the better off you're going to be, just because you get more comfortable answering them. So I definitely recommend doing that. I know that it's awkward. You can ask my mom. I like did not want to answer questions with her, but it helps and it's really important to do so. I did that, and then the day of my interview, on my drive down there, I just tried to think through clinical scenarios. I think it's really important to have clinical scenarios in mind when it comes to answering questions, because that's pretty much the brunt of everything they're going to ask you. They want to know. I'll list a bunch of these questions down below in the description. Give me an example of a time you worked with a difficult coworker. Give me an example of a time where you made a mistake and how you fixed it. There are a bunch of just personality-based, scenario-based questions, and they'd want to know like patient safety, how you work well with others, why you'd be a good part of their team, all of that stuff. So I tried to think through and just refresh my brain on some of those clinical scenarios that I'd already had in mind from practicing the question. So I did that on the way down there, and I kind of just listened to like some pump up music. I kind of just tried to clear my brain and be as relaxed as possible. I was very nervous, but I was so excited, guys. Kind of how I felt for the NCLEX. I was nervous, but I was so excited because I just wanted to do it. I just wanted to get it done. I'm telling you guys, this is such a competitive program. The program that I got into, I'm not trying to brag at all. Please don't take it that way. But there were hundreds and hundreds of applicants. I was just excited. I wanted it, and I felt like, you know what, if it's not meant to be, it won't happen. But the fact that I even got an interview alone was huge for me. So I was so excited to just have an interview. I just wanted to go and talk about it, and like the NICU was the only job I wanted. Let's be honest. Like, yes, I interviewed for other stuff, but this was it. This was my dream. This is what I wanted. I didn't care about anybody else. I didn't care about any other unit. I wanted this unit, this hospital, the NICU. Like, that was it. This was my dream. Like, this was it. This was the one. This was the biggest one. This was the most competitive one. Like, this was everything to me. I was just excited, to be honest. I just felt like, okay, awesome, I got an interview, and that's all I can ask for, and all I can do is give it my best shot. And if it doesn't work out, then it's not meant to be, but if it works out, then that's awesome too. So I was just mostly excited. So I showed up. It was kind of a little bit different because of COVID stuff going on. I had to wear a mask. But I went in, had my temperature checked. They made sure I had my mask on. They gave me a little sticker that said like I'd been screened and I was fine. I went up to the unit, and the unit secretary was there. I just told her like who I was and what I was here for. So the lady was going to give me a tour came by, and she gave me a tour of the whole unit. It was wonderful. It was so crazy because the unit's so different than the one that I did my senior practicum on, which I loved. I had a great experience. It was wonderful. They're just two very different units, and it's funny because they're the same level, which means they can take the same acuity of babies. but they're very different. The unit that I did my practicum on had, oh my gosh, I think like 16 beds or so. This one has 50. I'm not trying to like bash or anything at all. I love that unit. So I'm not trying to compare. I'm just explaining the differences and what I noticed on my tour. The unit that I was on for my senior practicum, when you had to fortify milk, they were these little packets of like fortification powder that you mix, and it just changes the ratio of calories for the baby to be consuming. And you do it all yourself, and it's like math, and you have to calculate like extra feeding if it's going through a tube because some gets stuck in the line. It's this whole process. But that's like pre-done for you, and your feeding is like delivered to your baby's room every morning. So wild. Like I would have never, I didn't even know that thing existed. It was just interesting to see the differences and to see the resources that are available at this hospital that I'm not used to. So that was really cool. The unit was great. It was beautiful. The staff that I met was super nice. So I got my tour, and then they took me to a room, and it was a three-person panel. It was the unit educator, the unit manager, and the assistant unit manager. And to start off the interview, they just asked me some like basic questions like, have I taken the NCLEX? Have I passed yet? Did I read through the description of the job? And do I feel like I'm physically capable of meeting all of the requirements, which are like lifting, bending, standing, that kind of stuff. And then we just started with the interview. So they were all scenario-based questions, and they just did like a round robin where one person would ask a question, then the next person, and the next person, and we just go in a circle. And they told me that if at any point I needed to pause or ask to do that question later, I could do that. If I didn't have an answer right away and needed some time to think on it, that was fine. I didn't need to do that, but you could. And then they also said if you could come up with real experiences to talk about, then touch on those versus like making something up or giving a hypothetical. So thankfully I didn't have to give a hypothetical, but there were some that I had to sit there for a second and be like, oh, like I don't know if I have an example for this, but ultimately I came up with one. They each asked questions. They were all very scenario based, like give us an example of a time with a difficult coworker, give us an example of when you promoted safety for a patient, give us an example of a time you experienced a cultural difference with a patient and how that like improved your cultural competency and how you'll be a better nurse culturally moving forward because of it. Probably 10 or 12 questions. And then the very last question was basically they said like, okay, you have a patient, and I'm not going to give you all the details, but essentially the patient was given the wrong or about to be administered the wrong medication. What steps do you take? What are you going to do as the nurse if this is your patient? So I explained my answer. That was it. I asked my questions, which I have a whole list of questions that you can ask in your interview. I'll link them down below to kind of ask them questions back, which I think is super important. It's really important to show that you have an interest in the unit and just that you want to know more. And so being prepared and having questions is huge. Definitely do that. So I'll link those down below, like I said. So I asked them questions, they answered them, and then once we were done with that, said thank you to all of them for their time and their experience in the interview and just being here and letting me have an interview, and that I appreciated it. And they said, okay, like great, thanks. We have some paperwork for you to fill out in another room, like a little paper portion of the interview. And I was like, okay, I didn't know what that meant. So we went to another room, and the lady handed me a piece of paper, and it was, I want to say 8 or so questions that were all patient scenario based situational questions. So you have a patient that's experiencing this disease, what do you do? Or this symptom, what do you do? You have a patient that has RSV. Knowing what you know about RSV, what would you do? Or what would you anticipate the doctor ordering or anything like that? So they were all essay questions. They told me I could go anywhere in the hospital to answer them. I just needed to turn them in to the unit secretary before I left, and I could take as much time as I needed. So I sat there and I really thought them through. Some of them I like erased and rewrote because I didn't like the way I worded it. I answered those questions, I turned them in, and I left. And you can see like what happened after I left. I'll link it in the vlog up here. But that's how the interview experience went. I think it went good. I never know how to feel about interviews. I always feel uncomfortable, but obviously it went well because I got the position. So that was the interview portion. Like I said, it's really important to ask questions, to really think through your answers, to come prepared with clinical situations that have happened to you in the past. One of the videos that I watched before this interview was from the Twin Diaries. One of the twins is a NICU nurse, and she talked about this exact same topic. I will link her video down below. I absolutely loved it. Yeah, that's another great reference, but I think that it's really important to show an interest in the hospital. Any research that you can do on the hospital before you go in is huge. So like in your answers, trying to talk about yourself in a way that makes you appear more positive or touch on your strong points, while also touching on the hospital and why you want to work there. So researched this hospital, and I found an article on the day that they broke ground and why this hospital was built and the community that it serves. And this hospital was built because they are one of 8 major cities in the United States that didn't have a pediatric only hospital. So that's why they built this hospital. So I talked about that. They're one of the only like pediatric only ERs in the region. So I talked about that and the kind of patients that could bring in. And you know, if NICU babies are discharged to go home and they come back through the ER, that could bring in diversity of NICU babies back into the NICU. So I talked about that. I just think it's important to know the community that the hospital serves. Go onto the hospital's website, look up their mission statement. It can be a little tricky to find, but you can find it. It's there, I promise. It took me a minute to find mine, but you can find it. Just take some time beforehand and do your research and really know about the hospital and be ready to talk about like why this hospital, why their unit, because ultimately they want to know why us, like why should we pick you, why do you want to work here. So you want to show them like, I know about your hospital, I know how great you guys are, and I want to be a part of this. And also you want to talk about yourself and why you'd be a good part of their team, because that's another thing that they're trying to figure out through the interview process. So how do you work well with others? How do you communicate with others? How do you handle conflict? That's where all those kind of situational questions come up, and why those are a lot of what they use in the interviews, because that just shows them the type of person you are, and you really want to showcase that. So if you can bring up an example of a time where you promoted patient safety and that showed your knowledge of the 5 rights, or that showed your knowledge of advocating for a patient and standing up for a patient, especially in the NICU where babies can't speak up for themselves and parents aren't always there to do the advocating, you as the nurse need to be doing that. So you could touch on that, touch on instances where you showed going above and beyond for a patient or responsibility, or just bring out in your answers traits about yourself that would make them want to hire you. And just show your freaking heart. Like, I got kind of emotional in my interview, and I think that's okay. I talked about me being a preemie and my experience with that, and my experience with my mom having me in the NICU and her working in the NICU and me kind of watching her. I think that it's important to show your heart and show why you're passionate and show that you care. And if you get emotional, it's okay. Don't turn into like a puddle of tears on the floor. But if you want to show your heart and really just like put it all out there, you totally can. And I think that that's great. And I think that that will show them why you're so invested in this unit and this population of NICU babies, if that's what you're interested in, which probably if you're watching this, and why you'd be a great fit for their team, and why you'd provide excellent care for their patients, and just all around be a good fit for their unit. So yeah, don't be afraid to show your heart. Put it all out there. It's totally okay. You guys are gonna do great. Take a deep breath. It's gonna be awesome. And yeah, that's how I got my job. I think they called me a few days later and offered me the position, and then a few days after that, actually like a week or 2 after that, I got my contract in email. And then like a week or 2 after that, I got a call from HR just going over everything with me, and now I'm in the process of starting. So I hope that this helps you guys. I hope you found this video beneficial. If you have seriously any questions at all, I respond to every direct message that I get on Instagram. I try and respond to every comment on here. So if you want to get in touch with me, send me a DM on Instagram. I'm much more likely to like respond quicker on there than I am on here, because I don't always see comments as they pop up on YouTube. So if you have a question, if you want to get in touch, if you just need more to chat or more information, feel free to reach out, please, guys. Like, I love helping you, and I want to be here for you, and I understand how much that this job means to people, because it meant that much to me. So feel free to reach out, and I'll see you guys. Take it slow, don't be gentle.